Chapter 10, Telepathic Bridges. Journal entry, time and date, unknown. Location, unknown. One of the creatures came closer and without hesitation or consideration, thrust its thin, spiny hands between the incision on my belly. Pain erupted, and I felt tears streaming down my face. Or was that blood? My God, what were they doing to me? Every molecule in my body wanted to escape, wanted to become something else. Anything besides this. A different life, a different existence. Why was this happening to me? How had I gotten here? This alien appeared to be the leader of the group. He was larger, uglier, and seemed to give the orders. Big Ugly, I thought. Maybe giving him a silly name would somehow humanize him and minimize my fear. The center of his head was adorned with an upside-down triangle shape that seemed to illuminate at times. Staring at this illuminated shape caused me to remember something. I realized Big Ugly was the same alien who had been present at all my episodes. But these were not episodes at all, at least not in the way I previously thought of them. They were visits. If he had been the one responsible for orchestrating the visits and this abduction, then my programming mind told me there was a pattern to be figured out. I understood, however, that I was a long way off from solving any problems at this point. I was helpless and as ineffectual as a spoon in a butcher shop. Big Ugly glared at me as he carelessly groped, shifted, and squeezed my organs. The intense pain was second only to the burgeoning fear. The triangle on his head seemed to glow each time I writhed in pain. How could I be paralyzed and feel pain at the same time? What I was experiencing in that moment unraveled my sanity like a loosening stitch whose threads were sewn from a different reality, their reality. To my surprise, and theirs, a scream detonated from my mouth, expelling the large object in my throat. Not even alien technology could keep my fear from finding its voice. My body involuntarily jolted forward with a power that seemed to make them anxious. I may have been paralyzed, but my body's reflexes were tuned up to the key of F, for flight. A smaller entity just out of my field of vision came forward and pressed me back down against the cold metal slab I was on. Big Ugly pulled his hand out from inside my gut and clutched my throat tightly. Cold and slightly moist with my blood, his spindly fingers were inexplicably strong and had a power beyond their appearance. Effortlessly, like a boa constrictor disinheriting its prey from the oxygen it needed, he squeezed. I thought my head might just pop off. As he leaned in to remove the distance between us, he brought his sick black eyes close to mine and cocked his head slightly to one side. He was broadcasting an intangible look in those murky black eyes. The transmission was hopelessness, and the frequency was a wavelength of despair meant only for me. He captured me with a look that spoke more than words, a look that shut down the delicate strand of confidence I was clinging to. He was telling me that no matter what I did or what small victories I attained, the fear would always have power over me. He would always be able to find me. Just as he had in the past, so would it be in the future. In the midst of all the pain and fear, I had failed to realize that the object I had spit out was floating near me. In fact, lots of things were floating around me. There's no gravity, I thought. I quickly took an inventory of my surroundings. What I saw made my heart sink even deeper. There was strange alien-like equipment surrounding me. This was a stark contrast to a human hospital where the instruments are typically shiny, smooth, and benign-looking in nature. Crude and dirty devices were being used in various horrifying ways on me. Some were used to restrain me, some were inserted into me, and some seemed to be used to monitor my level of fear, while others had purposes beyond my understanding. The devices appeared archaic and ancient, yet somehow advanced beyond anything I had ever seen. They pulsated and throbbed with a lifeblood of death and hate. Some excreted thick black liquid as they performed their sinister tasks. That onyx liquid looked similar to what I had been vomiting lately. All the alien tools seemed powered through their own will, as if everything in this alien environment was connected to a single consciousness with the ability to make their own decisions. The room was selectively lit by orbs of light that illuminated only certain areas they wanted me to see. Even the lights seemed alive. They floated around like brilliant sprites, casting visions of consternation and fear. All the anger, Frustration, sorrow, and pain I had ever experienced paled in comparison to this intense anguish. Suspended all around me were many forms of human enterprise, and some things that looked non-human. Trinkets of various sizes and shapes spun in and out of my field of vision. Coins, watches, articles of clothing, pieces of metallic somethings. What I saw next broke any hope I had of getting home. A lump in my throat swelled but refused to be swallowed. Among the floating debris were human body parts. A few feet away was a human eyeball, floating calmly in the air. A blue eye. It looked sad, even though it lacked the supporting expressive features of the face that once owned it. I was peering into the eye of some man or woman who had been tortured and eventually reduced to pieces. Would the next victim see my eyes staring back at him as he contemplated the very same outcome? The aliens didn't seem to notice or much care that bits of things were floating all around us. For them, it may as well have been party confetti. Other body parts in various stages of decay floated past me in a never-ending ballet of human torture. Most of it looked as though it had been torn off and pulverized. Some pieces were spinning fast, others slow, and some not at all. The properties of gravity may not govern this realm, but at this moment my heart was carrying with it a great deal of weight. Big Ugly held me in close. His eyes were like two polished black convex mirrors, and my frail and withered reflection stared back at me in his eyes. My complexion was gray and muddy, like water spilled over a parched surface. The joy and love once radiating in my eyes had all but vanished. No more virility than looking into a dead man's empty sockets. His eyes were deep black ponds, relentless, knowing, and evil. There was something else behind those eyes, though, an arrogance. That's when it occurred to me. If he was capable of arrogance, then he had an ego. If he had an ego, there existed fallibility, weakness, corruptibility, and so on. I wasn't ready to fully commit to my armchair diagnosis, but a glimmer of hope flashed in my mind. Big Ugly must have sensed my newly gained hope through telepathy and pulled back for a moment. The triangle on his head darkened as he tightened his grip around my neck. He looked past me to one of the other creatures, and a moment later the terrifying sound of a drill, or perhaps a saw, permeated the ambience. I heard cracking and crunching and felt an immense pressure as the instrument went in and out. A warm syrup began streaming down my face, and I quickly realized it to be my blood. One of those bastards was behind me, just out of view, drilling into my head. Massive amounts of blood flowed down the contours of my face. Then the drilling came to a stop. I heard their voices and thoughts through telepathy. Did they know I could hear them? I hoped not. The voices began to increase in volume and urgency. A pain and pressure I had never experienced began to well up in what I guessed was my brain. Even though the brain lacks the ability to feel pain, it was there. Like a headache, only somehow it felt like it was outside of my body. The alien voices grew louder and louder, more urgent. I heard a sound like a wet rag being wrung out, and more blood streamed down my face. Were they digging around in my brain? The notion of them carelessly dredging into my gray matter nearly made me faint. I was sure this was it for me. This is how I would die. Call it my life flashing before my eyes or being in a trance from fear. But I next found myself in a memory that eclipsed whatever awful things were happening in my present. Kate and I sitting on my couch watching reruns of the hit show Lost. It was a simple memory, an unremarkable memory by all accounts, but a good memory. And then it was gone, and the weight of my situation pulled me back in. If I could meditate on these memories, perhaps it would make this experience more manageable. I attempted to meditate, trying to remember Kate, trying to remember us. My memories with her were precious and good. Maybe I was going to die here, but I was in control of my thoughts, and I wasn't going to serve up a free meal of my fear to these bastards. No way would I give them the satisfaction. As I began to meditate, trying to adjust the fear into a manageable threshold, the aliens' voices increased in volume. The deeper I got into my own mind, the clearer the voices became, almost sounding like a conversation. It seemed as if there was some sort of correlation between meditating and the telepathy happening between us. But at what cost, I thought. Surely if I was receiving information, I was most likely sending something back over this psychic bridge. Not the code, I thought. It was at this moment that I understood what I was doing here, spread out and bleeding on a cold metal slab on an alien ship. They wanted the code. That's what this was all about. I couldn't afford for the code to be revealed to them, and I didn't want them to know I was listening. I quickly remembered a lesson I was taught in elementary school. One year, the school counselor came to each classroom and educated us on something called the wall method. It was designed to put up a mental wall between you and a bully that was picking on you. I realized that something similar might work here. Instead of just a wall, I quickly imagined building an impenetrable castle to house my code. I knew how to program my own mind, and that just might make the difference in this psychological warfare. With a few seconds of intense thought, I built a simple castle, but using a very complex and unbreakable cipher to form the mental structure. The cipher was called the Dagapeyev cipher, and it had not once in all of history ever been broken. Inside the castle, I stored the code inside a deep partition that in order to retrieve, one would need the ability to break the unbreakable Dagapeyev cipher. Even if the cipher failed, the castle was just as impenetrable, if not more, or so went my theory. These aliens were the equivalent of galactic bullies, and it didn't elude me that these creatures were operating with an intelligence I couldn't begin to comprehend. Although I did get the sense that their intelligence existed mostly through their technology, and therefore it was a one-dimensional intelligence. I doubted they appreciated the complex emotional acuity that was hardwired into the human psyche, and they certainly didn't understand Nate Carlisle's intelligence either. At least I hoped. If they found the castle, would they easily topple it over and retrieve the code? Or would they torture me until I lowered the proverbial drawbridge and let them inside? Neither, I hoped. The code was safe inside the castle for the moment, but it was naive to carouse too deeply in my success when I was completely at their mercy, or lack thereof. They were in control. They decided when and how much. The torture continued for what felt like hours. The moment I passed out, I was sprayed with their pink alien stimulant and pulled back into the nightmare. I was passing out into a blissful dream that felt like an eternity, only to be thrust back into reality, into their reality. This, I soon realized, was the true torture, the true horror. The dreams I was having for those brief moments were lucid and polished, like a well-written script. This seemed to be the intentional and desired side effect of the process. The visions were so real, so believable, and so devastating to be ripped from and thrown back into this hell. One loss of consciousness might present me the memory of an intimate, sensual moment with Kate. Another could be a fond memory of my childhood best friend Dean and I fishing in Texas. Whatever the memory, I was being deliberately steeped in it and then pulled back out to be greeted with hungry black eyes staring at me. I had no way of knowing how long this evil modus operandi would continue, or what other sinister forms of torture they had prepared for me. I knew one thing, though. I couldn't last forever. Eventually, my will would expire, and along with it, me. A man can take many physical afflictions and torments, but when it comes to the mind, it's fragile, like a thin pane of glass. The right amount of force applied against it will begin to crack its surface, and eventually it will shatter. By all accounts, I considered myself to have a relatively strong constitution, but I too had my limits and could feel my pane of glass beginning to fracture.